Hi, my name is David Voorhees. I live here in Western North Carolina, and I'm a potter, and I'm sitting in front of my kiln. This is my wood-fired kiln. Let me start at the beginning, though. Been making pots since my very first one is in 1970, and I threw it about 20 minutes away from here at a camp I was working at. I was a tennis instructor, and they had a potter's wheel there, and it looked interesting, so I tried it out, and I got hooked. So anyhow, I've taken quite a few courses over the year, mostly with individual potters, but mostly I built the wheel, got started doing it myself, and just kind of got hooked on it, and I love doing it. Actually went to grad school in painting, didn't like the program, and I really wanted to be a maker. I really wanted to be an artist who made things. I wanted to produce things. So I dropped out of grad school and never looked back. And so here I am in 2020, that is 50 years ago that I made my first pot. That just is stunning. But I still love doing it, and I still do it most days. I have changed my pursuits in clay a bit over the years, as one would with any career that spans so many years. So I still do mostly functional and decorative work. For many years I fired in electric kiln. I did a lot of porcelain work, but when I built this kiln, I started getting interested in stoneware again. So I've kind of split my work between stoneware and porcelain pottery. I got interested in wood firing probably 15 years ago, and I built this kiln in 2009. I've rebuilt the firebox end of it once, but it's changed the direction of my work because of the firing is so interactive with the clay and the styles that you create for it. And so I've learned to adapt to this and to respond to what this kiln has to offer me, which is probably a little more than I had bargained for when I built it. I thought I was in charge, and I'm not really in charge. And I love that aspect of working in clay, having something that pushes me beyond what I could find in an electric kiln. An electric kiln that I have inside my studio, I use for predictability. I use it because I can control it. They have computer controls on it, and I push a button for start, and the next day I unload it. This is very different. I have to fire it with a group of people. I have to work for weeks getting ready for it. I have to stay up at night firing it. Make good friends around a wood-fired kiln. So, and this, you can't see, there's a pizza oven here too, so we have a lot of friends because of that. So we do a soda firing with the wood, and we've actually introduced soda when the doors closed up into 12 ports, and that gives a very different look to things. I actually have a piece here from my most recent firing, each piece I do that comes out of the kiln encourages me to the next piece. And that's another aspect I love about being not just being an artist, but being challenged by the art form that you've chosen to pursue. My sisters are both painters. My parents were painters, and they were always trying new things and traveling to new places, and they never allowed themselves to get comfortable. And I think that's a great lesson for life in general. Here we are in the midst of COVID, and there are so many challenges with that. Nobody likes it. Thank goodness everybody in my family has stayed healthy so far. So, and I hope for your family too. But these are challenges that we face, and I don't know why I'm talking about that, but if you're interested in knowing more about my pottery, you can go to my website, davidvoorheespottery.com. I'm active on social media, Instagram, David Voorhees, on Facebook, David Voorhees and David Voorhees Pottery. Anyhow, you can just Google me, you'll find me. So I live in Zirconia, North Carolina. Love to have visitors. If you're interested in coming out and seeing some of my pottery or coming to visit the kiln, feel free to call me and we'll set up a time to visit. So thank you for watching.
I'm Jane Voorhees, and I'm here in my studio in North Asheville. It's a sunroom in the back of my home. It looks over the alley and a grand old oak tree that's in the neighbor's yard that I love to look at. I wanted to tell you a bit about myself. Growing up, I love to draw. I love doing calligraphy. I love sewing and making things and learning new things. I grew up with an artist dad, and I watched him paint in his studio just about every day. And I don't have a memory of him teaching me to paint, but at some point I knew how to use watercolor and I loved it. I attended a small liberal arts college in Florida, Eckerd College, and I majored in art there. And about that time, my mom started seriously painting. So after college, my folks and I decided to attend the Art Students League in New York City for a month. And so we traveled to New York from North Carolina, and we took classes in drawing and painting from early in the morning until late at night. And those classes and that studio time had a tremendous impact on me. I saw how my art improved in that time, and it reinforced for me how important a daily practice is in growing as an artist. Sharing a love of painting with my folks, we started attending painting workshops together. We had many summers together on the coast of Maine, as well as workshops around the country with various well-known artists. When my folks started traveling to England on painting trips, I would join them when I could, and we traveled and painted in Cornwall and then later in North Yorkshire. I moved to Asheville from the Northeast in the early 80s. I worked as the general manager of Malaprop's bookstore, and I would paint during my time off. Then about 20 years ago, I left my full-time job to do my art. I started my card business at that time with my paintings of the western North Carolina mountains that I love so much. And now my cards and prints are sold in shops and galleries throughout the East Coast. I feel like I'm constantly learning and growing as an artist. Taking workshops is for me a terrific way to learn. And I usually take at least one a year, either in person or online. I've studied with John Lovett, Skip Lawrence, John Lines, Charles Reed, Karen Margolis, just to name a few. I find this ongoing learning to be one of the most rewarding parts about being an artist. I consider myself a landscape painter. I love this area and I find lots of inspiration here. I love how the mountains look on a foggy morning or after a rain. I love driving the Blue Ridge Parkway or back mountain roads in the fall and stopping to take lots of pictures. I generally work from my reference photos in my studio, but I also do enjoy plein air painting at times. I would say my sketchbook is my most essential tool. I carry one with me everywhere. I have one that stays in my car with pens and pencils. I keep one in my bag, and I even have a tiny one that I stick in my back pocket when I'm traveling light. I try to sketch every day, and my sketching practice continually teaches me to slow down and pay attention. The best advice I have to give to anyone interested in pursuing painting is to carry a sketchbook and use it regularly. Just that one practice will move you forward in ways you couldn't imagine. Well, that's about it. If you have any questions, just email me or go to my website, janevoorheesart.com. Thank you.
Hello, welcome to my studio. This also happens to be my home, which is in the room that was originally the parlor. It's located in downtown Morehead City, which is also the location of the first Voorhees Family Art Show. I am Amy Voorhees, and I am married to the youngest Voorhees son, which is Chad. And tell you a little bit about myself. Chad and I met at art school in the 70s at Virginia Commonwealth University, which is also known as VCU. And I was in the sculpture department at the time. So I really didn't, although I had taken a few painting classes there, I really didn't start painting till our 3 children were grown, so it was much later. Although I've always been, I feel like I've been studying art all my life because, as most artists, I had an early interest as a child, and I loved to draw, and my mother always encouraged that. She also was an artist. So although I can't remember ever really wanting to do anything other than be an artist. I think I wanted to be an architect once for a little while because my uncle was, but other than that, I always wanted to be an artist. I have studied at several universities, VCU through my junior year, as well as the University of North Carolina in Asheville. I took some wonderful classes there, also with famous artist, or statewide artist known as Tucker Cook, which was a good experience. I started my painting experience there with several watercolor classes, but that was over 30 years ago. So it is something that's sort of like a touchstone. I go back, I do some art, and then life takes over and things happen, parents, children, life, work. So yeah, it's one of my interests, main interests, but I have several. So after moving to Moorhead, this is more of a rural area, I did end up taking some classes at the local community college, which is where I started painting more seriously. This is when my children were older. And I started in acrylics and really had no plan or direction. I just enjoyed the process and spent a lot of my energy thinking about dreams, memories, and that was a lot of fun to start that way. I do still think of those things, but that sort of was my jumping off point. To further my education, since I do live in a rural area, there aren't, without traveling distance, there aren't really very many classes to take. I pursued taking workshops where I did have to travel from many national artists, and I've studied with Camille Press-Roderick, Lee Boynton, Sarah Sedgwick, Peggy Noel Roberts, and I did have a year-long mentorship program that, under Kevin McPherson, just to name a few. I've done quite a few more. But I'm mostly interested in graphic shapes, and maybe that's from my sculpture background, but I also like to find something that interests me in the still life, or that intrigues or interests me in the actual settings that I'm looking at. Often it's lighting, but it can also be a story that I begin to form in my head. If I find myself talking to myself, then I know that I'm really into my painting and that I am connecting with it. And usually I don't want to sell those paintings, but I do end up selling those because I get very connected to them, and I feel like if I love them, then there's something to love about them in there. This process can also, for me, painting process can also be very frustrating because you want it to be thoughtful but also fresh and immediate. So this takes a lot of planning, which seems to contradict the spontaneity, but it's a process that I'm always trying to rework, revisit. I enjoy painting probably the most in my studio. I enjoy painting still lifes, actually. I like to study them, and I do like to look at things as I'm painting. I do like to see my objects. Some people paint from their memories more. I like to look at what I'm painting. So I have painted plein air. I thought I was going to love it because it seemed like a natural fit, because I tend to be kind of messy. And I thought, oh, this is perfect. I don't have to worry about cleaning my studio. I can just go out there and, make a mess, and nature will take care of those things. And I find it to be a bit of a challenge. It's a little bit like camping, and I never was a very big camper. So although I like to stretch myself, and I do paint outside, the moving sun, the rugged ground, the flies, all that stuff, that's a whole nother set of challenges. So then I retreat back to my little comfortable studio, and sometimes I paint from photos, Sometimes I even will go into Photoshop and manipulate a photo and paint that. That's a really planned painting, and I like that too. I like either doing a very fast, loose painting, and sometimes my styles look very different because it really depends on my mood and my focus on the way that I approach a painting. Thank you for listening.
Hello everyone, my name is Molly Sharp Voorhees and I'm a jeweler. I make jewelry out of mostly metal and mostly sterling silver, 14 karat gold and 18 karat gold. And this is part of my story. I've been making jewelry for about 43 years. I started in the early 70s. I lived in England for 10 years and I had 2 children. They were close in age. They were about 1 and 2 years old when I started realizing that I needed something else to do besides children. So I took myself to a pottery class and a metalsmithing class. Well, the pottery class did not work very well for me. I was not very good at it and I didn't like it. I made my first silver ring, just a little band like this, and I fell in love with it. So I've been doing it ever since. I didn't take too many classes in England, so I was pretty much working in a vacuum. I had very few tools, no studio space. But I kept at it because I liked it. Well, after about 10 years, I moved back to the United States with my children, and I lived in Atlanta for a while, and I started taking some classes in metalsmithing at Penland and Aramont and John C. Campbell, but I did feel like I could make a living and support my children making jewelry. So I had a full-time job working at a museum for a while and other various places, but still keeping jewelry going on the side. So then I moved down to Jacksonville, Florida after a while because my mom was there and I was still raising my children and still continuing working full-time doing jewelry on the side. Finally, my children grew up and left home as children do. One went into college, the other to the Coast Guard, and I went to Penland School and took a class with Thomas Mann. For 2 weeks I was up there, and guess who I met? Penland. I met David Voorhees. He was there for 2 weeks also taking a ceramics class. So long story short, I went back down to Jacksonville. He wrote me letters. He said maybe I would like to come up to Western North Carolina to see how things were here, the environment for craftspeople, and maybe I could just make a living doing that. And so I said, sure, I'll come up. I'll come up for a cup of tea and just check the place out. So I came out, and the rest is history. I basically never left. I went back down to Jacksonville, packed up my house, moved everything up to North Carolina. David and I opened a gallery called Hand in Hand Gallery in Flat Rock, North Carolina, and we got married. We went to Scotland to get married, and he introduced me to many galleries, and I applied to the Southern Highland Craft Guild. And I got in. A funny thing is that he was the head of the committee to jury me in, but he did not vote on me, so it was okay. So I did get in, so that was part of my career. And I've been making jewelry ever since and just loving it, and I am making a living doing it, and I'm so pleased to be able to say that. It's been my lifelong dream. So now I'm in my studio right now. You can't see a lot of it, but I'm sitting here in my lovely studio that David designed and built for me. It's above his studio, which is downstairs in the pottery studio downstairs. I mostly teach right now. I teach up to six people here in my studio, but I also teach other places. David and I have gone to Mexico to teach a class. It's a collaborative class that he and I do called Silveramics, which you will hear more about in another segment. And I teach other places too. I teach at John C. Campbell Folk School. I was supposed to teach this past year at Pocosin Arts in North Carolina, but of course with COVID and the pandemic, that didn't happen. And I'm getting ready to teach next year also at Miami University in Ohio and various other places. But I enjoy teaching in my studio. Right now I'm only teaching 1 and 2 students at a time. If you're interested in learning metalsmithing or brushing up your skills, please contact me at my website. You can go to mollysharpmetalsmith.com. All the information will be there. So the type of work that I do, I fabricate everything from sheet and wire, and I make metal jewelry, and that's basically all I do. It's called fabrication, and I have a few pieces here to show you. I have this piece, which I use natural pebbles quite a bit in my work. So here's a necklace that I designed and made, and I have a little pair of earrings to go with it. Here's a little, and I'm going to show you a couple pieces. Here's a little pendant that has a pebble, and I'm going to put it up against my hand so you can see it. It has a pebble caged in sterling silver. Here's another pebble. This is one of my most popular pieces. I also teach all these things that you're going to be seeing right now. I teach everything I make. This is a little toggle. It's a tube riveted pebble that has a little toggle in there. And I also do a lot of hollow forms. So this is called a three-sided pod that I've made, and I learned how to make these. I also teach this. It is hollow. And another little hollow form here, three-dimensional hollow form. Has a little hole in there. It's interesting, the construction of this. I love teaching these classes. And the other one would be my door, which is part of my COVID series. I did a series of COVID-19 artwork during this pandemic, and this one is a little three-dimensional door, and I call this When Will We Open? Quite appropriate, don't you think? And then another thing that I teach, this is a bracelet. It has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different elements, and each element has different techniques. So there's a pierced element. This has actually kimbu on it, which is 24 karat gold that's been fused onto the silver. This is a cabochon set stone. This one is called, this is a little, let me see it, this is a little crescent roll bead. Rivets, more kimbu for 24 karat gold, another hollow form, and some piercing in this one. So this is a fun bracelet to teach and to wear. So this is for sale too. And then I love making rings. So these are a couple of rings with jaspers set into them. And these are nice chunky rings. So that's kind of what I do. Love to teach. I do sell my work, and you can go to my website to purchase my work at mollysharpmetalsmith.com. And if anybody's interested in learning, please contact me, and I'll be happy to teach you. Thanks for listening.
Hi, I'm Susan Voorhees, and I'm the third oldest sibling of the Voorhees clan. As a kid, I remember just doing kid things. We were really lucky to have parents who nurtured our individual personalities, our gifts, and our spirits by often letting us lead in the pursuit of our interests, unless they were a little bit too dangerous. They exposed us to art by our weekly excursion to museums, but also we would go to historic sites, we went to the zoo, we went skiing, but we always did these things as a family. They really set an example for learning art and practicing art. Um, as I remember, we'd gather around the dining room table, and Daddy would be painting and Mom would be drawing, and the rest of us would find our space there and be engaged in whatever projects we were doing at that point. My childhood was ordinary but different from my brothers and my sister. I had polio as a baby and lots of surgeries from the time I was like 7 and to 8 to 12. I think it was like that. And as a result, I was in a cast a lot, and I used crutches and that sort of thing. But despite this, I wasn't left out of anything except school. I didn't go to school, and then running around outside. The reason I bring this up is that I was home all the time, not in school, and I found it a very, very creative time for me because I let my imagination lead me. I learned a lot of problem solving, persistence, and joy in the act of creating. I made things constantly. I learned how to sew when I was 8, and I made my own clothes. They may not have been the best, but I liked them. And I drew and I painted and I constructed things, and I found a lot of happiness and solace in the act of doing. And I find that the creative spirit and creativity and the art of making have been really important resources to me throughout my life. I just wanted to show you an example of something I made when I was 8. So it gives you an idea. It's this house, it's our house, and it's over 50 years old. And inside, this is from an 8-year-old perspective, our kitchen and dining room. This is the living room. We lost the furniture along the way. This fancy room was mine. David and Chad had a room together. Jane had her own room. We always had rooms together. And you'll notice there's not a window in this room here with the bunk beds. That was Ted and Kirk's room, my oldest brothers. And I don't think I liked him very much at that point. And then here's my parents' upper suite with their bedroom and their studio. uh, anyway, one of the things that my parents um, really taught us and instilled in us is one important lesson, at least I feel it's an important lesson, is that if you have the will and a desire, that you can do almost anything. And if you don't like it or you don't have an affinity for that, you can change it. And that means that if you don't like your career, you change it. If you don't like where you're living, you change it. And I've used that lesson throughout my life, and it's allowed me to do the things I love. I always wanted to give back and help other people because of my illness and my surgeries. So I ended up in a very creative field of occupational therapy. As a result, I did my art as a hobby. I took classes on and off, went for workshops with my parents a lot of time. I designed clothing. I wrote a book about disabled clothing for the disabled. I painted in watercolors, oils, and pastels. Moved to North Carolina in 2005 to be close to my family, to Jane. My mother lived down the street, and my brother David, so we could all make art together. Before my mother died, Jane, mom, and I would go up painting off the beaten track. And I often found the places because I was doing home health. And Jane and I have continued going and painting at places that we discovered together. One of my goals when I moved here was really to loosen up and to paint faster and more spontaneously. And so painting in plein air, which is outside, has really helped me. I've taken a lot of workshops over a period of time with pastel, watercolor, and oil painters. And through all the years, they keep stressing the basics of value, composition, and color. Thanks for listening.